morning, Angela Parker of Realized Worth.
Good morning, Brian. Good to see you.
Great to have you on board here this morning. I'm very excited to chat with you. We always have a good time chatting, but now we'll share our fun of chatting, all things volunteering together here with everyone else. So for those of you who don't know what Realized Worth is, it's a global CSR consultancy focused in employee volunteer training, volunteer program design, and employee engagement. And Angela is the co-founder and CEO. And with that, I want to kind of kick things off, Angela, by saying you kind of wigged me out at the end of December. For those of you who don't know, Angela is a bit of a prolific writer and blogger and posts. And it's always great resources, wonderful information. But here's the title of the post that made my eyes bug out and freak out a little bit. As a software company owner, founder, the title is, "It's the end of 2021. Why are volunteer participation rates dropping?" So, I fully admit that 2020 was bad, 2021 was better, but, neither year, for obvious reasons, were, what any of us expected it to be. Whether you're an employee as a software company owner, whether you're in employee giving or volunteerism or whatever. But there's been hope in the last 9 months with vaccination and all that. So, I have to say it did kind of, wig me out. So I'm going to be an interrogator here. I want to quote you on something and get your reaction. You said in this piece, volunteer participation numbers are down. And it's not because communication campaigns are faulty or people are tired of Zoom. It's because corporate volunteering in many cases is, wait for it, fluff. Bam, Angela, expand on that if you would.
Okay, well, I have to start by saying, Brian, I don't know about you, whenever you publish writing or put something of yours out there, if you have this, I think it's Brene Brown that called it a vulnerability hangover.
Yes.
I will say, with all my heart, I write these things and I put them out there and then I'm like, oh, how is it going? How are people responding? And one thing that I had a conversation with someone later and that put me in a position of wanting to acknowledge every time I talk about this, that there are all kinds of barriers to corporate social responsibility programs, to especially, I would say, the practitioners in the positions that are trying to get these programs up and going. They're the ones that are responsible for to demonstrate to senior leaders that these things are successful, to make sure the numbers go up and up, but they don't have typically a ton of resources or even the authority that they need to make that happen. So for all the practitioners that I work with, I want to say I acknowledge you are in this for the life-changing, social movement driving, barrier-breaking corporate volunteer program design. And sometimes you're stuck, and that's just how it is. And I completely understand and want to acknowledge that even when you have programs sometimes that are fluff, that don't invite change in people or in society, sometimes it's just because you're stuck and doing everything you can to get there. On the other hand, just between us, Brian, there are companies, there are some practitioners that are just building, team building events or just trying to set up a nice day out of the office so people feel good, and feeling good isn't bad. And I know they typically want those events, that volunteering to matter to the nonprofit. No one's going to admit that they're fine with painting the same wall some other company painted the week before. Nobody wants that. But there are a lot of companies that need to do it better.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I think even in this time, especially, and this is probably a good sign in a way, employees, just people, humanity, we're tired. And maybe we're just getting better now as this virtual world, this pandemic life keeps going. Maybe we're getting better at making good choices about how we spend our time. Maybe we're choosing very carefully to be in places and with people that make us better, give us energy, motivate us, create a sense of meaning. And we have to be really careful about choosing not to be part of things and part of events and projects and activities that are a waste of time. So, for companies, if we're asking employees, if we're inviting employees to an experience, which is volunteering, it's got to be worth their time.
It has to matter for both the nonprofit and the employee. And, I come from the age where having served on a volunteer board, and from the nonprofit perspective, that it's always been about the nonprofit and should remain so as number one priority. What do they need? But what I love and what you're saying here too is that this goes beyond that now, and that the employees do matter, of how they, not just to ask them to volunteer, but what matters to them, what's important to them. Where's their sense of, we'll get into this more in a little bit, but what do they need to get out of it? So we'll come back to that in a bit. But were you going to go ahead?
Well, you just made me think of that WIFM, the what's in it for me. And I think we're getting better as a field of thinking of it this way, not only not worrying about the fact that there is a self-involved piece to anything we do in life, that is not necessarily meant to be altruistic in that sense. We all choose things that align with our values. We do what we want. We make time for what we need. So there's got to be a what's in it for me aspect. Totally. And that just makes psychological sense.
It's human behavior. You can't change human behavior.
Right.
You also said, I'm going to continue to be a little bit of the interrogator on this article that made my eyes bug out in a good way. You also said, while the purpose of corporate volunteering might be clear, we are painting this wall to save the NPO staff time, increase the capacity of an organization. The meaning, and this is really where we're heading with this, you've already kind of opened this piece of the conversation up. The meaning of corporate volunteering is often nebulous. What is the meaning of painting a wall? Why does it matter that it's me doing it? How does this activity have anything to do with my company? What difference does it actually make? So this is kind of expanding upon what we were just talking about, but share. Let's go down this path a little bit more.
Yeah, I love this question. I love thinking about the difference between the concept of purpose versus meaning. It can feel like it's just semantics, but I'm one of those people that does think words and language is incredibly important in how it guides societies and changes behaviors and creates cultures. And I know, obviously, one of the major things we're trying to do with corporate volunteering is identify how it changes the way employees perceive their companies. Do they stay longer? Are they better employees? All of these business benefits that we're looking for. So purpose has been a big word in the evolution of the space, especially the past few years. I'm sure.
Sometimes overused.
Yeah, well, it's already becoming one of those phrases people are like, really? I can't even know what it means anymore. One, I don't know if people really knew what it meant from the beginning. I mean, it's used all over social impact programs in companies at a high level, from BlackRock talking about that. Don't get me started on that one, to companies that have always been purpose driven and we've known, like, Patagonia's.
It's incredibly subjective. It's an incredibly subjective word.
Yes. Exactly. I think a lot of people would probably define it in different ways. We've even talked about that for years and years as the definition of volunteering. What even is that? So all of these things really need definitions to guide what result they're trying to drive. And I think purpose is a good guide. The word purpose is a good guide. It's a solid principle. And I like thinking in terms of principles. What is guiding our behavior as opposed to rules or even hardcore definitions. But I think we also have to be careful of concepts, words, phrases, frameworks that we can use as kind of an excuse just to check that box. If we check the boxes that call us a purpose-driven company, qualify us as a purpose-driven company, program, person, whatever, then I worry, and maybe I'm overthinking, I do tend to overthink, but that it can be a way to just stop thinking about what our programs do, how they affect change, especially in the individuals that participate in them, which is why I bring up the word.
We'll talk a little bit more about the meaning behind it. Even if the meaning, because we say purpose is subjective, if there are separate meanings for different individuals and or companies, that's okay, as long as you are defining the meaning.
Yeah. You know what?
We're getting deep and we're drilling deep, but this is important stuff.
This is important stuff. And I love that you just said defining, because I think we can define purpose and then we can create space for people to make sense of meaning. And meaning is the most subjective. It is each individual's meaning. So, we can understand the purpose of a job, a purpose of a role, a purpose of any action. And that's the rationale. That's the reasoning behind it. Whereas I think meaning is more about, like, understanding who I am within that purpose. How do I see myself? What identity do I assume in the world? Like when I decide to participate in my company's volunteer program, it's key. It is a huge win to know the purpose for sure. Why are we even doing this thing together at this company? Why does it matter to the company? What's the rationale? That's motivating stuff. You've got to have that. But then if we want to effect change, get to societal impacts, like the real stuff that we say we care about here, the stuff that, undoes our biases, engenders empathy, gets to better decision-making, like leads to voting certain ways, making policies that drive certain ideas. That's where we get to meaning. When we bring meaning into the conversation, into the event, the volunteer activity, we're asking individuals who participate, who are you? Who are you in light of this experience? How have your assumptions been challenged because of volunteering here, because of facing an idea or an issue? What was uncomfortable? What was difficult? How might that change your beliefs and your behaviors? And that really should be, corporate volunteering should
absolutely
center not only the communities we're serving, but also the effect on the employees who are participating. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And for the HR folks who are watching, this goes back, you already mentioned it before, employee retention, and yes. not to use the nonprofit sector for the purposes of cause and effect of employee retention. But here's the reality. The more meaning, the more purpose, that stickiness in this era of the Great Resignation is more important than ever. And it is key to employee retention and recruitment too, one can argue, and an ongoing engagement while they're an employee. But the retention is really key. It's expensive to replace people,
huge.
More expensive than ever.
Huge. And that is, I think,
want to keep them on board.
Yeah, people are thinking about that all the time. Of course, the Great Resignation, they're thinking how they're thinking about their own general sense of meaning in life in their companies. Of course, our companies, we're spending 8 hours a day or more being influenced by those cultures. That is, we're thinking if anything needs to change, if I'm feeling a lack of a sense of meaning, the first thing I'm going to think about is the influence of the place that I invest at least 8 hours of my day every day. And that's huge.
Right. That's right. So let's lead with purpose and drilling down into meaning. And now let's talk a little bit about, and I don't want to in any way disparage companies in any way that are focused on employee giving. I totally recognize, I own Revere Software, which is a volunteering software platform. We are very comfortable in our skin that employee giving is always going to be number one for any nonprofit because revenue coming in for the nonprofit, they're not going to exist if there's not money there. So employee giving is probably forever going to be number one, and it should be. Number two is volunteerism in terms of employee engagement. In my mind, a very strong number two. In Carol Cohn, we all know Carol Cohn, who she's kind of the one of the founders, really, of the CSR space, and she might cringe as I say that.
She calls herself the grandmother of CSR.
There you go. I didn't realize she
I love
grandmother.
It.
I was actually kind of thinking of saying, the mother, but
I know. I think I would say mother if I were her, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal. She's not old enough to be a grandmother. But she recently said, and this taps into the purpose and the meaning that we've just been talking about. Purpose is now table stakes for any company that wishes to be relevant, competitive, and at the highest levels beloved.
Oof, good.
Those organizations without a clear purpose are already behind and can expect to face a, quote, great reckoning of their own in the year ahead. Now, this quote also made my eyes bug out. Oh, Carol, holy cow. So, what do you think about, money talks, it's still, absolutely most important, but is it time for us to go beyond just money? Not replace, money's going to always be number one, but now are we in the state of doing more than ever in the name of purpose and drilling down into that meaning?
Yeah, I love that you differentiate. Nonprofits need money, and we should prioritize that. And we're also looking for a change that sweeps across the people who are engaging with those nonprofits, which is where doing maybe comes in more than thinking about doing for the nonprofit as if they were an object to do something to. We're thinking about engaging with a shared issue or cause or purpose that we are as responsible for as they are. And I love, Carol, I'm totally biased here because I love Carol so much. I think she's a genius. I love that she's not afraid to say these truths.
She's a straight talker.
She's a straight talker, and she knows. She's been in the space a long time. She's seen a lot come and go, a lot of ups and downs. She knows companies intimately. She runs companies. And, I would even say there are a lot of companies that have a clear purpose and their employees don't know it. They're not rallied around it yet. And they also...
That's a whole other conversation for another, communications being the key to all of this, but that's a whole other conversation.
Absolutely. And I think employees are hungry for that. And last year, even, this may not be surprising really when we think about the ups and downs in society, but last year we actually saw giving numbers drop in general across companies. And I kind of want to say that. So any companies you're listening, I'm like, you're okay. It's normal. It's happening to everybody. Everyone I talk to.
I mean, it's
tough times. It's tough times. And this is another thing that aligns with human psychology. We respond to what feels urgent or new. Our evolution allows us to not focus our energy constantly on everything that pops up around us that is a need. But if it's dramatic, if it's urgent, if it's new, if it hits a point in us where we think, what? Yeah. Like the pandemic, George Floyd's murder, natural disasters of any kind. That's when the purpose is really easy to access, and we're motivated. Clear purpose is motivating for sure. It's when we want to sustain that meaning has to be tied to it. Yes. Purpose, no problem. I'll get up and go. I get it. Yeah. I see why it needs to be done right now. But if this is an issue that needs ongoing commitment, it needs to be connected to who I am and to my identity, Mm-hmm. And
it's true. And just to add to that, there's studies been done of the fact that, for both nonprofit, but, employees, it is physiological as well, that by defining that meaning, I share with prospective clients all the time, and they some of them maybe in the past have kind of chuckled when I've said this, because we're not a drug dealing software company, but we hand out dopamine.
Yes, I love that.
We deliver dopamine to our corporate clients' employees every single day when they are being asked by nonprofits for their expertise. That is a huge dopamine hit. That is meaning. When you get that goosebump feeling of that you've just helped somebody, a nonprofit, in whether it's, in financial modeling or software design, or, it's anything under the sun. Mm-hmm. That's a dopamine hit.
Yes, absolutely. That is huge. And that is of course, that's what we're looking for. Maybe more than ever right now. I guess ever is a big word. But in a significant way, we're looking for that.
We're in an interesting time. I'm old enough to look back and go, this is unlike anything else I've witnessed. Let's move forward and let's talk, a little bit about your top three tips for developing such volunteering strategies. I want you in the piece. That made my eyes bug out. You said, number one, in terms of top three tips, invite employees to bring meaning, not just purpose, to their volunteer experience. We've been talking a lot about this, so I don't know if you want to expand beyond that. We've kind of been drilling, but that is your number one.
Number one, yeah.
Do you want to expand beyond that other than what we talked about?
One thing to note, because that can feel, speaking of being nebulous, bring meaning. What is bringing meaning? And if I can just quickly, if you don't mind me, Brian, asking you a question.
Yeah.
Can you think of a time, like a moment in your life that you can look back at it now and you know that whatever happened, because it was unexpected, because it was dramatic, because it was meaningful, beautiful. It could be a lot of different reasons, traumatic even. That's kind of a turning point in your life. It's a moment, a tipping point where you think, even maybe in the moment you thought, I will never be the same. My life will never be the same. Are you? When I ask that, are you able to?
How many? There are several points. And that would require happy hour with everyone who's
Right.
you and you and drinks on me. But no, absolutely. I think, just not to be overly personal, but one thing that just changed my life at a very relatively young age. I wasn't a child; I was a young adult. My mother passed away suddenly. And she was young; she was 65 years old. Died of a heart attack. That was a defining moment for me in my life of deciding, okay, that if that's going to be me, then too, I want to make certain that there's meaning in my life along the way. So hopefully not too personal there.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing that you would share that. Thank you for that. My mom passed as well. And I, even the way you're talking about, the Celtics call that feeling that you had in that moment, they call it thin space, like a moment where you just have a sense, it doesn't have to be positive, but you just have a sense of what matters for a minute, and it does affect who you are going forward. And that moment we transformative learning theory calls that a disorienting dilemma. When something happens to you that changes your sense of you in the world, of what the world means, of what you believe, it changes things for you. And your path sort of changes going forward, even if it's just internally. And that often
people
happens.
Can head in different directions. Some can go in a more, I need to feel safe and I'm not going to take risks. I took the opposite approach. I became a larger risk taker because of it.
Yeah. And sometimes if we don't stop and evaluate in that moment, we don't even quite know what direction it's taking us, but we're changed. We're changed still. And like you described, and like many people I hope are thinking as they listen to this and think about their own disorienting dilemma, it is often dramatic. Mm-hmm. It's often painful. It's often traumatic. And that is when change happens. But those moments either happen in those big traumatic, literal moments, or they happen over time when we're introduced over and over and over to something that is not quite what fits our expectation, not quite what we were taught, something challenging that challenges our assumptions. And we can create those moments, those gentle introductions to disorienting dilemmas every single time we volunteer. And again, this could sound unclear, and I can be more concrete about it, but that is initially, that's the principle. The principle is use volunteering to be a space where people are invited to challenge their assumptions. Yeah. That alone will get you farther toward greater impacts.
I'm going to use that as a segue because I love your second tip. Create space to challenge assumptions, develop empathy, and change behaviors. I love this. I'm old enough I'm aging myself here. I'm not going to call myself grandpa. I'm going to be like Carol Cone. But I'm going to say this, that back in my day, my corporate days, we were told, here's what you're going to give. There was a gun kind of held to your head of, here's how much you're going to give based upon your salary. It's all going to go to this nonprofit, large nonprofit, and you have no control in any way of where they're going to be using those funds. And it was, when I describe that to Gen Zs today, their mouths drop just going, right. Why would you even put up with that? Well, it's because we all needed jobs and that's just the way it was. But those days are long gone, and nonprofits are no longer enabling that and allowing that. But that's all changed in 30 years. And what I love, I'm going to give a couple of examples before you share more on this point, because you and I have talked about this before. In fact, I shared, I know on one of your webcasts that we have one client in particular who is really open to, going back to Brene Brown, being vulnerable themselves as a corporation. And it's a large Fortune 750. They're not Fortune 500, but Fortune 750. I think there's 6 something. They have thousands of employees, and they survey their folks. So this is the opposite of, in addition to surveying their current nonprofit partners and their prospective nonprofit partners, what do they need in terms of skills-based volunteering, which is what we do for them, making those connections. But what do the employees need? Here are some of the examples. I pulled a couple of them that this client, their employees are saying that they want. You're going to love this. Well, we've already talked a little bit about it, but focus on empathy. This is coming from the employees. practice authenticity, strengthen my collaboration skills. These are, in addition to some of the more traditional, I want to hone my leadership skills. I want to hone my, if it's team project, skills-based volunteering team project, they want to hone their project management skills, maybe even working in Asana or Atlassian, that kind of stuff. But these soft skills that they are not just saying, I'd like to get this. No, there's something in it for me. There has to be something in it for me. Expand.
That's amazing. I love hearing that. And okay, so that helps me. So let's make it just really, really, really simple if we're thinking about the principles that will get employees to those things that they're asking for. And different companies are going to apply this in different ways. But I think after you decide your cause and you set up the structure and you make it so that the system is not a barrier to participation, then at every volunteer activity, I would suggest to make sure, however you do this, that employees, that participants in the project, activity, event, whatever it happens to be, could walk away and answer a couple questions, which are really about who and why, and then another why. So the who is like just every time, in order to begin to connect with that empathy and authenticity, who's the project for? But I mean, like literally, who is a real individual person that this is for? And tell me enough about them.
Going to benefit from this.
Yeah, right. And not just benefit from, like, say, receiving a box of food, but how does it maybe even change or begin to adjust that way that person, the beneficiary, sees themselves? That there's more than just giving a person food, but really the way we get to that is by being able to begin to imagine their lives. Just to think, who are they? Think about their lives. Think about if it were me in that situation. And then why does it matter to that person? What is the significance of this task? That comes from Adam Grant's work, Task Significance.
Yes.
How does it connect to these people? Like that's all about moving it from being about a task-focused activity to being a people-focused activity, empathy. So that's huge. I mean, especially because people are actually asking for that. And then it just, third thing, I don't know why we forget this as companies. A lot of companies don't, but again, every single time, how does this connect to our company? Right. Why are we doing this as a company? How is this more effective because we're doing it as a company than it would be if you were doing it on your own? And that's always where that reiteration of purpose comes in, for sure. It's a great space to over and over and over state, this is why we do this. This is who we are.
Yeah. Well, and you just touched on, in terms of your third point, position volunteer events and projects as steps on the way to impact, not impact itself. You just sort of segue, in terms of, so expand on that a little bit in terms of how this is, and we are, a connector. We are a conduit. We are not Revere and our clients and all of their employees, all their nonprofits. We are not impact. We are a conduit for impact. And it sounds almost...
I love it.
I don't mean to be like... Sounds religious almost. And I'm not necessarily... I have a spiritual sense, but, it is... There is that behind this, that we are all part of the steps on the way to impact, as you describe it.
Yes. And that, I would say, a lot of companies are talking like this now, which is incredibly encouraging. I mean, not just companies, senior leaders are saying volunteering is not the end result.
Yeah.
We kind of hopefully will all say duh when we hear that. Events, projects are not the end result. This event, this project, this activity is a step on the way
amongst
to
many
collective.
parts.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many parts, so many influences. We're all moving toward a collective mindset shift. That's why we're all in this. Volunteering on its own, it doesn't make a difference just on its own. And enough nonprofits have been in part of this conversation that they'll even say sometimes it can be damaging for the community or for nonprofits. And as companies, we understand that. We have,
again, going back to the lack of meaning. If there's no sense of definition of meaning, it can absolutely send the wrong message. Going back to communications, which is a separate conversation that we perhaps should have sometime in our next discussion.
That would be great. Would be great. And I think a lot of companies are really moving toward this understanding and thinking about the moment beyond the events and the activities. And the last 2 years, I think, has taught us that even more. There are many, many companies, clients, partners, colleagues that I speak to in the corporate social impact space that are deeply committed to the potential of volunteering and giving to be the gateway, to go back to the drug conversation, the gateway drug to exponential and positive change. It's happening.
Drug.
Yeah,
I
know. I love it.
Drug.
This is a great gateway. And it's getting real. Companies in their programs are doing this. Times are changing, of course, in many ways, in many scary ways, but I think there's some real positive change happening within companies as they start to think about what is the impact for companies, communities, and individual employees long-term through the events that we have on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think that's a great way to perhaps end, unless you had something further that you wanted to add to it. But I think ending with this discussion of we're all part of this. We are all pieces of the puzzle.
Yes.
The puzzle being impact. And Angela, this was fantastic. I look forward to doing it again. I always love chatting with you. And this was, I hope others watching have found your thoughts and comments and your willingness to, kind of shake things up at times and say things, make my eyes bug out as you did. Keep up the good work doing that. I think it conjures up great conversation, which leads to purpose, which leads to defining one's meaning.
Yes.
Everything we do. So Thank you so much. Everyone, Angela Parker can be reached. Well, go to the website, realizedworth.com. Revere's website is reveresoftware.com. And Angela, if anyone wants to reach out directly to you, they should go out to LinkedIn and just tap you, send you a direct
I'd love
message,
to talk.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, thank you for this. And I do want to say thank you for the work that you and Revere are doing to lead this space into more impactful places. It's inspiring to me. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, have a great day, everybody. And Angela, again, thanks so much. And we'll chat soon.
We will.